Serial killers are getting caught more than ever due to advances in forensic science and crime scene investigations. These cold cases are often solved decades later, after which friends and family can rest easy knowing there's no longer a serial killer on the loose. Number 5. A serial killer named Tony Abels was active from 1970 to 1990, claiming the lives of 4 people. Tony Abels first struck in St. Petersburg, Florida. Investigators linked him to the crime scene in early 1971, and he surprisingly only served 12 years in prison. Though not yet a serial killer, prison did Tony no good, and instead of rehabilitating him, it only helped him become worse and more evil. Shortly after his 1983 release, Tony struck again, this time holding a pillow over 83-year-old Adeline McLaughlin in her home in Worcester, Massachusetts. By the time investigators reached the crime scene, Tony was already on the run. 4 years later, he would end the life of a 31-year-old woman named Deborah Kaiser. Her missing body would be found in the woods by children playing. Tony's final victim was his 48-year-old girlfriend, Marlene Burns, who he ended with his bare hands. On June 4, 1990, police in Pinellas County, Florida, responded to calls of a domestic dispute, and when they arrived, they found Marlene's body at the bottom of the stairs. It didn't take them long to crack the case, as Tony confessed to everything when officers arrived at his apartment. What criminal investigators didn't know at the time was that this was an interview with the same serial killer responsible for the unsolved cases of Adeline McLaughlin in '83 and Deborah Kaiser in '87. By 1991, Tony was serving a life sentence for what he had done to his girlfriend. He gave a DNA sample when he was booked. Forensic investigators did not test the sample until 2006, when they discovered a match for DNA evidence found at 2 unsolved crime scenes: the house of 83-year-old Adelaide and the woods where Deborah was found. Tony Abels was not charged in the case of Deborah Kaiser, as the two were romantically involved, which, according to police, complicates the case because it opens up a number of different legal tactics that could be used in his defense. Tony Abels continues to serve a life sentence at the South Bay Correctional Facility in Florida. Number 4. In the 1980s, one of the worst and most evil serial killers ever emerged on the scene in Los Angeles, California. For decades, this scary individual was simply known as the notorious Grim Sleeper. It wouldn't be until many years later, and thanks to crime scene evidence, that the terrifying serial killer known as the Grim Sleeper would be brought to justice. By the end of 1985, the Los Angeles police were certain that they had a serial killer on their hands. Over the past 2 years, they had connected 13 victims to one man they called the South Side Slayer. All of the women were street workers with black skin, a low priority for police investigators in the 80s. Despite several lackluster investigations, the serial killer was never caught for years. Decades later, the South Side Slayer, also called the Grim Sleeper by now, would become active in Los Angeles again in 2002. Investigators who had believed the Grim Sleeper either passed away or was arrested on different charges were proven wrong as one of LA's worst serial killers returned, claiming the lives of several women. The cases went unsolved until 2010, just 2 years after the Grim Sleeper's final murder, when the LAPD made an unexpected breakthrough. A man named Christopher Franklin was booked on unrelated charges. The DNA sample he had submitted at jail partially matched the DNA sample found at multiple crime scenes left behind by the Grim Sleeper. The murder mystery was not yet solved, however. Christopher Franklin was far too young to be the Grim Sleeper, whose crimes stretched all the way back to the 80s. However, Christopher was a partial DNA match because someone in his family was the real serial killer. Forensic investigators turned to Christopher Franklin Jr., his father, who was the right age to have begun in the 80s as a young man, and then emerge decades later to strike again. Investigators obtained a warrant to search Lonnie's trash, and were able to obtain a DNA sample from a slice of pizza he had thrown away. The LAPD held their breath as tests were performed, and when the results came in, they were shocked. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was confirmed to be a match to the Grim Sleeper crime scenes from 1985 to 2007. Lonnie was swiftly arrested and brought before the courts in 2016. Unfortunately, Lonnie would not face justice as he passed away at San Quentin in 2020. Number 3. Salvatore Perrone of Staten Island, later known as the Son of Sal, walked up and down the streets with a black duffel bag. He dealt in clothing as a traveling salesman, but he also had a second job as a robber turned serial killer. On July 6, 2012, Sal went into a clothing store near closing time. Only he and the 65-year-old owner were inside. He could have simply robbed him, but he chose to use a sawed-off weapon to do the unthinkable. 2 other stores were targeted over the months in that same year. As with the first crime, the employees were alone and vulnerable. CCTV footage at one of the stores had captured the criminal on camera, and just weeks after the crime, authorities in New York appeared at the door of the apartment of Sal Perrone, shared with his girlfriend in Brooklyn. Inside, they found a duffel bag, much like the duffel bag spotted on CCTV footage from the evening of the crimes. Inside the bag were weapons and duct tape that forensic investigators were able to link to 3 crimes. After this discovery, Sal's fate was sealed, and he was swiftly arrested. It would take 4 years for the Son of Sal to stand trial for his crimes, during which he claimed he was framed by a business associate from Iran, among other outbursts. What makes Sal one of the most evil serial killers in history is his total lack of remorse. At his trial, a shopkeeper's son tearfully recalled opening the door for him and staying open late, treating him as if he was a family member. Another witness claims to have unknowingly danced with him at a nightclub shortly after he committed his heinous crimes, during which he seemed completely normal. He was sentenced to 75 years to life in the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York. Number 2. On October 19, 2014, officers in Hammond, Indiana, responded to an incident at a Motel 6. The body of 19-year-old Africa Hardy had been discovered in the bathtub by someone she knew. After checking logs and CCTV footage, the police quickly zeroed in on their suspect. As they arrested Darren Dion Van, they had no idea that he was about to confess to being an evil serial killer during an interview at the police station. Crime scene investigators obtained multiple pieces of DNA evidence from the crime scene that was her hotel room. Africa was already known to investigators as a streetwalker. CCTV had captured Africa last entering the hotel room with her client, Darren Dion Van, and their prime suspect. Darren was still nearby when he was taken into custody. He shocked police investigators at the precinct by confessing to several other crimes that had taken place in Gary, Indiana over the last year. He told them that he had at least 6 others, and that most of their unsolved cases had likely run cold by now. His DNA was taken to compare against forensic crime scene evidence that Darren had confessed to. Forensic investigators revealed that Darren was telling the truth, adding several additional charges to his name. Darren was found guilty and is now serving 7 consecutive life sentences. Number 1. Mohan Kumar of India held a well-respected job as a teacher in his district. Those around Mohan knew him as a kind and caring person, but deep down he was harboring a dark secret. Not only did Mohan have 2 wives, but he was also an elusive serial killer that Indian authorities had desperately been trying to track down. 22-year-old Anita Molia was Mohan's 18th victim, and following multiple appeals, witnesses came forward and gave some vital information. On the day that Anita had disappeared, witnesses had spotted her with a strange man at a bus stop in her village. These witnesses were able to give a description and rough age, and investigators found a suspect in Indonesia who matched. Upon his arrest, he confessed to being responsible for at least 20 crimes in the area. telling investigators everything they needed to know. Active between 2005 and 2009, the serial killer was responsible for at least 20 women. His methods were horrifying. Introducing himself as a respectable teacher, he would seduce women in a relationship spanning a course of months. When they trusted him, he would bring them to a hotel and afterwards give them what he said was birth control. When they went to sleep that night, they didn't wake up. He would take their belongings and leave their bodies to be found someplace public, usually in restrooms. The serial killer had never been caught because he made sure never to introduce himself to family or friends of the women that he chose. He was never a suspect for these reasons, and also because foul play was never suspected in the first place. Investigators found multiple cell phones from his previous lovers, as well as their jewelry. Most terrifying of all was his diary, listing the names of all the women that he was working on. The ones who he had given up on were also written in red. He was also trying to murder so often that he would otherwise lose track of his next target. For his crimes, Mohan was handed a sentence of capital punishment. Had it not been for his confession, he would likely have gotten away with it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.